Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, January 30th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 215 days. The game against Michigan in 299 days. We're under 300. It's practically here. What is in fact here is part two of my conversation with Donnie Collins of the Scranton Times-Tribune. We talked about the offense on yesterday's episode of the show, running through the quarterback position, the shiny new quarterback there, Drew Aller. Offensive line, a big transfer they landed at wide receiver. So if you haven't listened to that, go ahead and listen to that one. That'll cover the offensive side of the ball. Today we're talking defense. And Penn State should have a pretty darn good defense back, but they have a couple questions in the secondary. We'll get to all of that. Plus, we're going to talk a little NIL. Where do things stand with the Lions and NIL right now? How is that helping or hurting them in recruiting, in the transfer portal, all that kind of stuff, keeping players on the roster. So we'll get to all of that. So here is part two of my conversation with Donnie Collins of the Scranton Times-Tribune. Well, and it has felt like that offensive line was maybe a little bit of limitation on Clifford, as you mentioned. That offensive line in the mid 2010s always felt to me like one of the reasons Christian Hackenberg didn't pan out the way that they maybe expected him to was he was constantly on the run, constantly on his back. That was, I think, at least a portion of those struggles. So they've maybe addressed the quarterback thing. They've maybe addressed the offensive line thing. You haven't talked me out of it so far. Let's try the defense, see if you can talk me out of it on the defensive side of the ball. They lose PJ Mustipher up front, but they get Adisa Isaac back. They've got Chop Robinson back on the ends. I mean, and it seems like most of the rest of the interior defensive line is back, and this should be a pretty good defensive line as well.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine up front. Ji'Ayir Brown missed the first couple of weeks this year, but he really came on at the end of the year. I think he'll be the guy that steps in for Mustipher. Mustipher is going to be a big loss from a leadership perspective because he really rallied those guys. He had them in the right positions. It seemed like this year, anytime they really needed a play, Mustipher made it. Whether it was occupying a couple of blockers or being able to make the tackle himself. Mustipher was one of those guys who always seemed to make a big play in a big moment. But on the interior, they're going to be fine. Devon Elise is another guy who I thought played pretty well this year. They have some other guys too in the interior, but on the edge, they're really going to be good. I mean, with Chop Robinson, Pro Football Focus, if you buy into that stuff, and sometimes I don't, but because sometimes you watch it with your eyes and it just doesn't mesh with what they're saying. But Chop Robinson he didn't get as many sacks as he really should have because he put a lot of pressure on quarterbacks from start to finish this year. Adisa Isaac played his best game in the Rose Bowl, and he's a guy who missed the 2021 season with an Achilles tear. He came back and really it wasn't until November when he really started to play pretty well. Denai Dennis Sutton, another 5-star kid they got out of Maryland 2 years ago. He really came on pretty well. I think they're going to be good up front. They're going to be able to get to the quarterback. They're going to be able to stop the run. Those defensive tackles, I think, are a question mark a little bit, but PJ Mustipher taught them well. And Izzard very quietly made a pretty big jump to me from his play. And when he was forced to play in 2021, when Mustipher got hurt, so how he performed in 2022, he was a difference maker. I think they'll be okay up front. I don't know if they'll be dynamic. And Penn State used to be dynamic when they were really good. Some of those years, 2016, they were dynamic in the middle. 05 when they won the Big Ten, dynamic in the middle. 08, dynamic in the middle. They're not. I don't know if they're going to be dynamic anymore there. I don't think that's the way they want to play under James Franklin. I think they want to be steady there and they want to occupy space. But those edge rushers are legit.
All right, now we got to move to linebacker, which means we got to talk Abdul Carter. He is someone who he camped at Ohio State, and Ohio State kind of went, I think we've got linebackers that are okay. And they were not the only ones that missed on him. He was listed as the 28th best linebacker in the 2022 class. I know we're just a year in. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess he is not going to end up rated as the 28th best linebacker in the 2022 recruiting class when all is said and done. He was pretty impressive as a freshman, should be better as a sophomore. He feels like someone that, Ohio State's going to look at him for, I guess, at least 2 more seasons and say, boy, I wish we had offered that kid when he came to camp at our school.
So it's interesting. Every year I do a recruiting chat with the local alumni association chapter. And last year's class, I did this whole big thing. And I put the Abdul Carter video on and I said, guys, I'll be honest, I don't see it. I just don't see why Penn State loves the guy so much. I think he could be steady. I think he could be a decent linebacker, but I don't see where he's going to be a superstar. And then you watch one game, and now you see it. It was just obvious from the beginning that this guy, he wears number 11, and you do look at him and think he's like Micah Parsons. He does some of those same things. I think he's a guy who, I don't think he's as athletic as Micah was, where Micah could have played running back and been a first-round draft pick. He could have played defensive end, obviously, and been a first-round draft pick, and they put him at linebacker, and he becomes one of the best ones they've ever had. But Abdul Carter is definitely a pure linebacker. And I think the thing that stood out to me last year, he got ejected in the first game after his first play at Purdue. He got ejected for targeting, and he didn't get to play that game. And we go into the second game. It's against Ohio, and he dominates the play, and you think, it's Ohio, but he kept getting better and better and better, and you realize he just doesn't know what he's doing yet. He doesn't even know how to play. But what really separated him, what really made him work, was when he made a mistake, he had the closing speed in spades to be able to clean up any messes. So basically, I think what was a 2-yard game that he made the tackle on last year, where it's like in years past, because they didn't have the foot speed at linebacker outside of Micah to really make those kind of plays, it might have been a 4-yard or a 5-yard carry. Well, Carter's making the play at 2 yards. Now, next year, when he can anticipate some things, that might be a tackle for loss. I think that's what they're looking at with him. He's very dynamic in pass coverage. He's a very good defender in pass coverage. I think Utah, and that's one thing Utah did well, was they did some misdirection to kind of confuse him a little bit, and they did. They scored the touchdown to the tight end in the first half. They beat Abdul Carter, but he adjusted, and they didn't bite on that again the rest of the game. They tried it, but Carter was there in coverage, so he learns fast. He makes a lot of plays in pass coverage, but against the run, obviously a ferocious player, and he's going to be one of those Penn State linebackers that gets after the quarterback too. He's a complete player. And they have some really good linebackers. I thought that was a big question mark for them at the beginning of last year too. But Curtis Jacobs was able to go to the off-ball spot, to their Sam spot, where he really belongs, and he excelled once Abdul Carter was able to get in there and play more at the will spot. And they got some pretty decent play in the middle too from Tyler Elston and Kobe King. So they have a lot of guys. Dom DeLuca. He plays on passing downs. He did a really good job as well. So it was a walk-on who got on scholarship because he's just so productive. So they have a lot of guys coming back next year. They don't really lose anybody at that spot. And they were playing their best ball in the last month or so of the season. They were a big factor in the Rose Bowl too. So that's an area where last couple of years, I think the whole linebacker U thing, I mean, and that's a well-earned moniker over the years, but they've kind of won it back, I think, in a lot of people's minds in 2022. And Carter is a big reason why, because he's going to be special. I think he's a 3-year guy.
All right. So it feels like if there's any question on the defense, it's going to be in the secondary. They lose Joey Porter Jr. They lose Ji'Ayir Brown. Those are two very, very, very good, very big pieces on that defense from last year. Do they have someone to step up and replace those guys, or is that kind of the one big looming question right now?
Well, they're going to replace Joey Porter, and I don't say that lightly because he was so good. He's a terrific cornerback. He's a legit first-round guy, and he made a lot of plays for Penn State. But they got Storm Duck from North Carolina, great name, out of the portal, and a really good player too. I think he'll start, which will enable them to keep Johnny Dixon in the same kind of role he was in this year, where he played really well. And they love Kalen King, and he grades out really well. And I saw a mock draft this week, actually, where Penn State had 2 of the top 3 picks in the 2024 draft. I mean, talk about way too early. It's way too early for the 2024 mock draft, but I've seen Kalen King go pretty high in those drafts. He's a pretty good playmaker too. So I think they'll be okay at cornerback, but they are not going to replace Ji'Ayir Brown. That's not happening. And that's no knock on the guys that they have coming in to replace him, which is going to be Zakee Wheatley. And Zakee Wheatley he's a playmaker. He gets in there and he's forced a bunch of fumbles in very limited time. He's picked off some passes. Jalen Reed's another guy. He's probably going to end up starting. Keaton Ellis is coming back as a starter. They're not as dynamic as Ji'Ayir Brown was in a couple of ways. One is Ji'Ayir Brown as a guy who forced turnovers was all time at Penn State. I mean, nobody in the secondary had forced more turnovers in his career than Ji'Ayir Brown had over the last 15 years. And you have to go back 20 years, 30 years to find anybody who was even close to maybe even surpassing him. So Ji'Ayir Brown was a big time playmaker, but he was also a guy they used at linebacker on passing downs. They moved him all around. Manny Diaz found some creative ways to use him. He was an edge rusher a lot last year. He took on tackles and won his share of battles. They're not going to be able to find a guy who's going to be as versatile as Ji'Ayir Brown as a player. And they're definitely not going to find a leader like the guy. He was one of those players. His story is remarkable. He had no offers coming out of high school. He had his one chance to play college ball coming out of high school was at Montclair State in New Jersey, a Division III school. And he basically said, I'd rather fail trying to get to play at the level I know I can play at than go and sell myself short. Ended up at Lackawanna College here in Scranton, and then ended up with Penn State, basically because they saw him play when they were scouting Jaquan Brisker during their Lackawanna time. And rather surprisingly to me, Ji'Ayir Brown turned out to be as impactful, if not more impactful a player than Brisker did. That kind of guy, he did so much for the defense. You had to account for him. He drove coordinators nuts, game planning for him. I don't think Penn State's going to have that kind of guy this year. Now, whether that lessens what they can do on defense or makes them a weaker defense, I don't know about that. They're going to be stronger in other areas, and the guys who will replace them are good enough players. But from a leadership perspective, from a versatility perspective, they don't have that kind of player anymore.
So when I was at the Peach Bowl, covering the Peach Bowl, Ohio State and Georgia, I'm outside at the Georgia team walk, and they start playing as we're waiting for Georgia. I'm standing outside, and they're late, and I'm getting a little exasperated, and they start playing Zombie Nation, so I am contractually obligated to be a smart aleck. I record a few seconds of that and tweet it out with, the closest Penn State has gotten to the college football playoff. And I know you saw that and said, essentially like, I knew what this was going to be before I even, started the video.
I did.
And okay, if that was the closest they've gotten to the college football playoff, it feels like maybe this year is now going to surpass the Zombie Nation outside the Peach Bowl as the closest that Penn State has gotten to the playoff. Is this like a Big Ten championship college football playoff or bust season at Penn State? Is that the expectation, or is it should be pretty good, wait and see? Like what's the mood there?
I think you're going to have your segment of fans who, and you know them well. I mean, the guys who say you win the national championship or it's a total failure at Ohio State. And I don't think it's going to be a total failure if they don't make the playoff, but I think it'll be very disappointing this year if they don't. And I'm not saying win a playoff game. I don't know if that's in the cards this year. 2024, all bets are off. They should be able to. They should be able to compete for the national championship in 2024. I actually think the 12-team playoff hurts them a little bit in 2024 because I think they'd make the 4-team field that year. So, but this year, to me, I think they can make it. I think they have all the ability. I don't know if they have all the experience they need, especially at the one key spot, which is quarterback. It's going to come down to, does Aller play as well as you think he could play? Does the inexperience of being a first-year starter hurt him? Do they drop a game early in the season that they shouldn't drop because he isn't quite ready for it? And I think that's always going to be a question with Penn State because you go into these seasons looking at your schedule and one thing that you have to do is you have to split with Ohio State and Michigan. And this year, I think if they're ever going to get Ohio State in Columbus, this might be the year because Ohio State also has the same kind of question marks at quarterback, but they play much better against Michigan at Beaver Stadium. Michigan does not traditionally play well there. So if they're ever going to get Michigan at home, you don't want what happened last year is what typically happens in Ann Arbor to them for whatever reason. But when the score gets evened up a little bit when Michigan comes, I thought Penn State actually should have beaten Michigan in 2021. I thought they played about 55 minutes of that game better than Michigan did. So coming in this year, I think if they could split with those two teams, there's no reason they can't be a playoff team. There's no reason they wouldn't be. But is it a total disaster if they lose to both Ohio State and Michigan? I don't think so. But certainly, if 2024 is your year, if that's the time you're going to go in and say, we're circling this is the year we're competing, we're putting all our chips in the middle. That's the last year of Abdul Carter, potentially the last year of Aller, potentially the last year of Singleton and Katron Allen at running back. We have to do it that year. Then I think it behooves you to make it this year and get that experience out of the way, because you don't want to be the first time team in that tournament. You want to be a seasoned team in the tournament. So I think this is a very important year for them to make the tournament. Now, again, I don't know if they have to, but I think it behooves them, and they certainly want to, and they certainly have legitimate expectations to do so. And you know, is this a season of failure if they lose 2? No. Is it a failure if they lose 3? Absolutely. They have to show well this time, because they finished so strong, and you've got a lot of momentum right now. And I think this is a coaching staff that believes it's really close, and this is a group of players who doesn't know any different.
All right. And before I let you go, I did want to check in on one last thing. NIL, it is sort of the big story everywhere, and every program feels like they're a million miles behind, and everyone else is paying their recruits $7 million a year, and yada yada yada. We've all heard it. What is the state of NIL around the Penn State program right now? Do they have an effective collective operating? Are they happy with how that It's been a little bit of a rough ramp up, I think, for a lot of programs. But what's the state of NIL around the Penn State program in terms of recruiting operation? Not that anyone can. It's not to be used as. We all know that. Okay.
We all know. Yeah.
Yeah. We all know. Yada yada. Okay. So hypothetically, if it was used in connection with recruiting at some program somewhere at some point, what is the state of NIL there? Is that been a help, a hindrance in terms of acquiring talent, keeping talent? What's the state of NIL at Penn State right now?
I kind of look at NIL as, when I go on vacation and I'm standing on the beach at the Pacific Ocean and looking out and like this massive expanse, and you start to think, wow, I can get in the water and swim, and I'll hit Japan or Hawaii or whatever, and it's just this big ocean of what's possible. And I think NIL with Penn State is they're standing at the foot of and the waves are coming up and hitting them in the feet right now. And I think it's probably the way it is with everybody. You're just starting to figure out what you know and what you don't know, and what you want to do with it, and what you can do with it, and what you shouldn't do with it. And certainly it's affected them. It's affected them greatly. I mean, we talked about the portal earlier. They had a kid committed. I think his name was Devin Carter. He was out of NC State, but he was one of their top guys early, and he committed right in the moments after the glorious Rose Bowl win. There's this commitment from Carter. And it's like, wow, that really sold him. Well, it turned out he wanted some NIL money, and Penn State told him they don't have it or whatever it is. So he ended up, I think he's at West Virginia now, where evidently they have a lot of NIL money. I think it's interesting, because the programs you would think have all this money and want to dole it out seem to be still, and Ohio State's one of them, seem to be in this area where they're still selling the benefits of their program first. And I think Penn State wants to do that. They're still selling kids on you can be an NFL player. We can develop you into what you want to be as a professional. The educational opportunities, the idea that you have to compete in the Big Ten, compete for championships every year, the culture, things like that. But does Penn State want to be a bigger player in NIL? Yes, I'm sure they do. I mean, James Franklin's famous line from a year ago, and I think it was Ryan Day who said that he needed $13 million a year to keep the roster together. And Franklin said, whatever the number he said was, it's probably more. And I'm sure it's true, because we see Penn State players that a lot of them are driving around in Teslas now. They have a couple of them got to deal with them. I mean, Dennis Sutton got an NIL deal up here in the Scranton area with a car dealership. He's driving around in a car now. So there's a lot of things that they're doing for players, but are they doing as much as other people are? No. And I don't know if they really want to go that deep into it. And from my perspective anyway, the schools you see that are really big right now in NIL and very openly handing out money are the ones who are on the cusp of competing, or who want to be more accurately, the ones who want to be on the cusp of succeeding. And West Virginia is a good example. They have the Rodney Gallagher kid who Penn State was really targeting as a recruit, and he ends up going to West Virginia. And honestly, it's because number one, he has a decent relationship with the coaches, but also they were offering NIL. So I think Penn State right now, and I know they don't quite know what to do with it. There's a lot of collectives out there. There's a bunch of them that are doing some different things, and I think they at some point feel they're working kind of with each other, but also kind of against each other. They don't know how kind of to work in concert for this, and it's all a feeling out process. And I would guess in 5 years they'll have the situation as it is right now streamlined, but then there'll be other situations that they have to come across and deal with then. So I don't know if they'll ever be totally comfortable with the way it is because they've never really wanted to operate that way, but they're going to have to, and they know it, and they're going to have to be better at it, and they know it. And I think it's I don't want to say scary for them, but it's concerning. And I think that from everything I hear, they're trending in the right direction, but they're not close to where they really want to be or feel they need to be with NIL yet. And I would imagine a lot of big time programs are that way.
Yeah, that feels like kind of the answer for just about anyone you ask with the program. Sort of figuring it out, maybe not quite where they need to be. We'll see where it is in 5 years. I think, yes, true for pretty much everyone. Donnie, really appreciate you taking the time to run us through all the 2023 Penn State things to know. Will you let people know where they can find you on Twitter, where they can read your coverage of the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I'm on our website, www.thetimes-tribune.com. We'll take you right to the Penn State website that we have for the Scranton Times. And on Twitter, I'm at twitter.com/ at Penn State TT on Twitter. So yeah, that's probably the best way to keep up with what I'm writing, with what I'm saying. I have a podcast now, so that's a lot of fun too. You can find that it's called Penn Stated. You can find that on Apple or Google or wherever you get your podcasts. So yeah, if anybody who wants to listen in, great. We have a good time with it.
Yeah, it feels like Penn State is going to be a hot topic of conversation, not just in State College, but also Columbus and maybe Ann Arbor as well this year. So yeah, Donnie is a great follow on Twitter, unless he's tweeting about the Yankees. But he's a good enough follow in other areas that I'm willing to overlook that. So Donnie, thank you as always for being here.
Thanks, Tom. Always appreciate it.
All right, and thanks again to Donnie for being a part of both of the last two episodes. That was a really, really informative conversation. I always like talking to him. He's got a really good perspective on Penn State. He's been covering the team for close to 20 years now, and has a very good historical perspective, as well as obviously knowing his stuff about the current team as well. So I would guess this is not the first time he's been on. It will certainly not be the last. We'll probably be back with him sometime over the summer when we start doing season preview stuff as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed that one. We've had comments on a couple recent shows like, hey, I wish you could have this person on more. If you guys have comments on that, throw them on YouTube, tweet them at me, whatever it works. Put them on the message board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you have certain people you want to see more of, you want to hear us talking more about certain topics or whatever, let us know. We're here to do this for you guys. We are not here just to hear ourselves talk. We are here to give you guys a show that you want to listen to, want to watch on YouTube. So if you do have suggestions on, hey, do more of this, talk to this person more, whatever it is, talk to this type of person more, that's great. Let us know. We're happy to try and accommodate any and all of that stuff. A lot of it's going to be conflicting, and someone's going to want something and someone's going to say, don't ever do that, and that's fine, and we'll just sort of figure it out from there. But we do appreciate your insight. We do appreciate you subscribing to the podcast. We do appreciate you rating and reviewing the podcast. That helps other folks find those shows. We appreciate you guys giving us thumbs up, giving us comments on our YouTube channel, subscribing on the YouTube channel, and of course at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Fantastic team of insiders covering the team, covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, the whole 9 yards, Ohio State football, Ohio State sports from every possible angle, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.